All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. Of course, my name is Fred Diamond. I'm the founder of the Institute for Effective Professional Selling and the host and the producer, Eric and Dean, of over 800 Sales Game Changers podcasts. I want to remind people you could find every past episode, including the transcripts, at salesgamechangerspodcasts.com. You could find this episode on salesgamechangerspodcast.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. Sometimes Dean and Eric, we get over 15 to 30 comments. We would love to go back and answer your questions. And again, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. If you're listening to this show live, it's March of 2026. And this is our March to Public Sector Sales Leadership episode of the Sales Game Changers podcast. Every day in March of 2025, we're interviewing a sales game leader or sales leader from the public sector markets, either federal, state, and local, maybe healthcare, education, talking about some of the challenges there, but also, of course, in B2B, business to business as well. Now, we have two leaders here from Island. We have Eric Appel and Dean Scontras. Now, Eric, you're the CRO, so you're just not working on public sector. Dean leads state and local and education SLED. So we'll get a little more specific with him about some of that. But I'm excited to talk to you both. And it looks like Island is doing some pretty remarkable and interesting things on a lot of the topics that we talk about, not just on the public sector side of the Sales Game Changers, but in the Sales Game Changers in general. So Eric, why don't you get us started here? Tell us a little more about Island for people who don't know. And then I'm kind of curious, Island has grown quickly in a marketplace that doesn't really tolerate hype. You can't really hype too much because customers have very, very demanding requirements. So what did you do right? What did you do right early to really begin to develop the trust with your customer base?
Yeah, Fred, thanks for the question. Thanks for having us on the podcast. Heard just remarkable things about you, and congratulations on all the success. 800 episodes is pretty amazing, and what a great pleasure for Dean and myself to be on. So thank you so much. I tell people all the time, Island has been the most rewarding professional journey / professional experience of my life. It has truly been incredible. We took a concept 5.5 years ago of the most widely used application, the application that people use for everything, that it's, hey, accessing my email, accessing things like Salesforce, Slack, Teams, Zooms, just what do I do to work? Well, you work in the browser, but the browser was never an integrated part of an organization's architecture. And so we saw a great opportunity to drive efficiency, because if the browser, think Chrome, Edge, those things, was not an integrated part of the architecture, what we've had to do in cybersecurity and IT over the past 25 years is surround it with all these tools. So things like VPN, virtual desktop infrastructures, web filtering, privileged access, all data loss prevention, all these things, because you don't control that browser. So Island said, well, what if the browser was an integrated part of the architecture? What if it was something that was integrated into your identity stack? What if it was how you now access applications, and it's allowed organizations to rethink everything? If the browser is now the way that which you work. And so the vision, which seemed kind of corny 5.5 years ago, was if you change one thing, you can change everything. And from an IT and work perspective, we have seen that can indeed be the case. And so it's been an amazing journey. Almost every large financial institution now works with Island. Most of the large healthcare, retail, high tech. We're now serving over 18 countries, growing fast. In the U.S. market, federal market, SLED market, and internationally as well. And now with the advent of AI a couple of years ago, when you think about how does AI get accessed, provision, it all happens in the browser. But yet, do you trust something like a consumer AI browser to work in your environment? Probably not. You want the goodness of it, but you want to be able to put controls and be able to leverage it as you would an enterprise stack of tools. And that's what we've been able to also do for AI. So been an amazing journey. Feel very, very fortunate. To your question on how do you actually deliver given when you think about cybersecurity and IT, something that's not going to just tolerate hype. Um, I tell people all the time that our product and platform makes us look good. As salespeople, it overcomes a lot of sins. The platform that we have built and continue to build is absolutely world class. We think about three things when we deliver. We think about how do we improve user experience, how do we improve security posture, and how do we deliver an ROI. And so far, when you look across our 950 customers, I think all of them would tell you that we've for sure delivered a better user experience because you're not trying to use a consumer browser now in the enterprise. But we're able to deliver a superior security experience as well as a great ROI. And so we've really leaned into that. And given that our product is doing so well, it's allowed us to take advantage of the success that we've had up to this point.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm very excited to talk about, or very interested in talking about the sales side of this, right? And how do you sell to customers? And, it's interesting. When I was first introduced to you guys, I saw, oh, a browser company. Well, what's interesting about that? And then as I got deeper into what you offer and why you offer it and how there's more value for customers, particularly the customers that a lot of the companies that are involved with the Institute for Effective Professional Selling deal with, there's a lot of criticality in what you're bringing to the marketplace. Dean Scontras, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what's most misunderstood about selling security solutions today? Again, like Eric had mentioned, a lot of the regulated industries that you're selling
Sure.
into
Yeah.
and government. Again, you lead SLEDs, state and local and education. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. Myself, I've been with companies like Duo, which was acquired by Cisco, and then Auth0. That's how I got to Okta, and then most recently Wiz, and now Island. So a little bit of a trend of highly successful companies that have been highly successful in public sector. So as Eric suggested, I think this has all the traits of all those companies of being equally as successful. I think the biggest misconception, and I talk to a lot of companies at the startup phase or the acceleration phase when they're thinking about getting into public sector and SLED, and I think one of the things, or the thing I hear most commonly, is that SLED tends to be a technology laggard, like they're behind the curve. But in reality, they do want the modern security solutions just as much as the private sector. It's really not about resistance to innovation, but the different realities that the public sector consumer has to deal in. And those are, budgeting timelines, how you get money for projects, the various compliance requirements, state ramp, fed ramp, all of those that apply. And of course, the procurement process is different, and even protracted, but sometimes legal review of deals. So those can add additional friction. But I think the biggest myth is that SLED or public sector doesn't, is a technology laggard, or resistant. But that's what makes, I think, it fundamentally different, and kind of where the biggest misunderstanding about getting into the SLED business. Yes, it takes time, but it's not because the companies or the agencies don't want technology. It's because a lot of the inherent systems that surround it make it a little bit a longer time to market. But we don't have to convince them the value of things like the island technology.
Yeah, before I hand it back over to Eric, for people who don't understand SLED, just give us a brief introduction and what does SLED mean? What type of entities do you sell into?
Good point. So we just got through the territory planning process, and SLED is enormous, right? It's not only 50 different states, but it's every town, a town, city, and county, K through 12 education, as well as private education. If you look at a SLED map, there's over, between 250 to 300,000 separate accounts. You look at 50 different states, and you have 50 different states. No one buyer is like the other. So it's a very diverse customer set. But state is largely the state and the state agencies, and that can fluctuate between centrally controlled IT and distributed IT. So there's even variations on that. Higher ed, universities, research institutions, R1s, R2s. Those are targets, and certainly K through 12. Don't forget local law enforcement and first responders, publicly paid utilities and hospitals. So it's a very expansive space, and that makes it sometimes tough to capture, right? how do you find the highest propensity to buy customers in the shortest amount of time. So it's a very sprawling space. So it's, again, 200,000 to 300,000 individual accounts among so many sellers. It's tough to get to.
Very good. Look forward to getting a little deeper into that. Eric, so you mentioned the scale and how the company has scaled over the last 5 years or so. What's had to change as you led the sales organization? Again, startup, it's usually the owners, like the founders, people like that. Maybe they'll bring in a techie who's doing some sales. Then as you scale, and actually before the show, we talked about how you're actually recruiting into universities. And we also do a show, of course, our office hours, Sales Professors Unplugged. So talk a little bit about you as a leader and how the company's had to scale.
Fred, that's a hard one because I will tell you, and Dean can probably appreciate this. At Island, we really tried, especially early on, and still to lean in with all of our resources. And we, as a CRO, Mike Fay, our CEO, Dan Amiga, our co-founder and CTO, and then so many others in the organization, just wanted to put our arms around every single opportunity to ensure, one, we understood what was important to them. Two, they understood our platform, where it's going. And then three, they had a great experience when they did a POC and then moved into buying. And so it was so hard. We all wanted to touch and feel and be a part of every single transaction. And I will tell you, for about the first 100 customers, we did. And we even lean in very differently for deployments, and that our sales engineers are actually responsible for that deployment as well, because we just want that intimacy. We want the intimacy that we built pre-sales to continue post-sale. And it's worked out really, really well. Now, as we've scaled and we approach, 1,000 customers and more, and we've got, 25% of the Fortune 100, yes, we've had to think about things differently. So over the past, 12, 15 months, we've put an enormous focus on enablement. We are scaling to hundreds of salespeople across all segments and verticals. So it's really, really important that they get immersed in a couple of ways: immersed into the product, immersed into the culture, the Island way, how to prospect effectively, how to run an effective sales campaign. So we've had to think about as run books. We've had to develop run books that give them the recipe for success really across all parts of the sales process, while we try like hell to not lose that intimacy, where it makes sense, where we can still go build executive relationships pre-sale, but also be present post-sale. That's the part of our culture that we really never want to change.
I'm kind of curious for both of you. What type of what are some of the characteristics that someone would have that would make them successful in selling for a company like Island? You mentioned you're scaling, you're bringing on a lot more people. It's again, it's not Microsoft. It's been around for 50 years with process. Everybody understands. You're selling something that's a relatively new concept. You need to know things. Here I am answering the question for you, but Dean, why don't you go first? And Eric, I'm interested in your thoughts. What kind of person would be successful selling at Island or a company like Island?
It's a great question, and it's one I actually have with my peers. Had this one in the industry. Kind of when you're going through an AE excellence profile, what does excellence look like? And you have kind of the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, fundamentals of being able to play the game and forecast and do those other things. But I think it's a big function of the intangible qualities. I'm a big fan of the Duckworth book, Grit, because I think that's the biggest future indicator of success for a salesperson. But it's like the famous Supreme Court case. I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. Thankfully, we do have, track records of people being successful in previous capacities. I think grit translates to, in especially at Island, which is we put a lot of emphasis on pipe generation through the rest of the sales process. I mean, the demos and the POVs take care of themselves, sort of at an alarming high rate. They convert from stage to stage to stage. I think the true measure of a successful salesperson at Island or anywhere really, it does come down to grit. And when it comes down to sales player, individual contributors, as I have in my AE excellence profile, that grit directly transforms to how can they create qualified pipeline in the short amount of time. And that gives myself and Eric the best indicator of future success. So I'm all about grit. That's why I like to, I tend to favor, being a former football player myself, I tend to lean towards athletes, because I think athletes, at least sales athletes, that show the propensity to get out there and really use the channel to do that, to use marketing to do that. And of course, in SLED, we use government relations and lobbyists to do that as well. But I think that overlaps, not only, being good in process and being good in grit, but also being good on execution. The other place we need people to be tremendously sharp are the details when it comes time to close. Once the POV is done, how do we execute there? So it's a lot like what they talk about in football now, where you got to have the process, but you also have to have the motor, right? So I think those are the two skills that I look for.
Yeah, Eric. So you've managed and led many sales leaders and professionals in your career, and I'm sure you've seen some that, well, I know for a fact you've seen some that have failed and some that have succeeded immeasurably. Again, today's show is being posted in March of 2026. What are two or three of the things that you look for in a sales professional? And they could be what Dean just said, but what are the two or three, maybe two things that you look for that you think will lead to that person being successful?
Yeah, and how I'm going to answer this is potentially different in Island than it is at other places. Island actually demands seller to be probably the best versions of themselves.
Hmm.
Island is not always a simple, hey, here is a problem, here is a product that solves it, go. Because Island now changes the way you work. Island, we think, is the future of work, and so it demands you to think beyond just, I got to get to this economic buyer, convince that economic buyer, and I win. You actually have to sell broadly. So I like talking to people that yes, possess grit. That's huge. What Dean said, because that's your motor that gets you up and gets you going, no matter the circumstance. But I also look for people that are curious into the accounts they're going to sell into. They're curious that, hey, I don't know that I'm going to absolutely need to go build a relationship or sell to that line of business, but it can't hurt with me building a relationship there. We have a saying in Ireland called selling past yes. It seems weird. Typically when you get a yes, yep, shut up, let's get the order, move out. Island, we like to say sell past yes. When somebody says yes, go build other relationships. Go find out what other problems that we can solve. Because if you think about, the browser is now expanded into this huge platform where we can help with so many different things in an organization, that for us, I like the grit, I like the tenacity, but I also like the curiosity, the desire to go find the complex and perhaps bring it back to a simple solution like Island.
Yeah. Dean, I want to talk about SLED for a second here. You know, uh, SLED is an interesting marketplace. As a matter of fact, a lot of our listeners know when I was at Apple Computer, I was the director of channel marketing for SLED. So I remember going on calls in Sacramento and understanding that the state of California is the seventh biggest, it was at the time,
Yeah,
seventh biggest entity on the planet, right?
sure.
You
Yeah.
know, and I also remember once I was talking to the chief procurement officer for the city of Philadelphia, who said to me, you know, citizens see fire trucks, right? They don't necessarily see security software that's being
Right.
used in an office per se. So I'm just kind of curious, like for you, like what are some of the biggest mistakes that companies make when they try to enter SLED as a new marketplace?
It's a great question. I think the biggest mistake is, and it alludes to a little bit what I said before. I think the first thing you have to have is product alignment, and this, sometimes people or companies think because a product's been successful in the commercial side, it immediately applies equally to the SLED side, and that's not always the case, right? There's good technologies that don't equally apply. So I think product alignment, product fit is a big one. I do think the average time to close, which I've had over the course of my 25 years career, tends to be a little bit longer. Just because of what I alluded to earlier, is that the decision process can be a little bit more protracted. As Eric just alluded to, there's a variety of different stakeholders in SLED opportunities, and the bigger the opportunity, the more stakeholders that are involved, and those can range from not only practitioners and CIOs, but all the way up to legislative staff and budget staff. So you've really got a wide variety. What Eric said about curiosity applies a lot as well. So you have a market, as I said before, they're not laggards, but the time to get there is generally a little bit longer. And I also think, product market fit, that was a real large reason I chose Island, which is when I saw the problem that Island fixes for state and local, especially in the budget environment we're talking about. I think those are a couple things that you need to really sort of gauge up front. Like, is there a product alignment? Do we have a signal? Is there a fit? What problem do we solve? As you said, it's not always apparent to the taxpayer. Again, I think we'll probably get into it a little bit later, but the thing that's apparent to the taxpayer right now is that budgets are cut, and a lot of these folks, all the practitioners, the legislators, the budget staff, are all looking for cost savings and software sprawl, right? So I think there's a few things to take into consideration for companies that are considering it.
Eric, you kind of alluded to this in your previous answer here, but let's talk about the right activities, right? Again, we're selling into markets that have a lot of requirements. There's a lot of risk because they don't want the risk, right? They're trying to eliminate risk, obviously. And we hear about cyber attacks and we hear about all these things, consistently happening. What are some of the activities that truly help to move deals forward at Island? Versus what are some of the activities that your reps do that just, at the end of the day, they're really not worth the time, but they're still maybe being done?
Interesting. Well, I was actually thinking a different direction. I'll answer what I think moves the needle and then give you some advice and maybe some things that don't. Because Island can impact so many parts of the business, I'll give you an example. When you think about enabling a merger or an acquisition, typically today when a company does that, they have an M&A budget. They ship laptops to the acquired entity. They put all these systems and all that, and it takes 6, 8, 12 weeks just to get assets out. That for a large acquisition can cost millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Island, I'm just giving an example. Island simplifies that because you don't have to ship a laptop. All you have to do is have them download a browser. They authenticate, now access the application. So you take a 12 to 15 week period down to about 30 seconds, and you shrink the cost from hundreds of millions to massively less. And so there's so many other examples that revolve around just understanding what's happening in that business. Let's say you're going through an M&A event. Well, Island can massively impact that thing in a great way. What if I've decided to outsource my IT staff? Well, now all of a sudden, Island can be a great way to enable that access. What if I've just told the board that I need to reduce IT expense by $100 million? Well, Island can do that. So the best sellers use tools like AI and other things to understand what's happening in the accounts all the time, and then use that current data that's happening in their accounts and then map it back to our value proposition. So now when we go target those people, we're targeting with something that's very real to them and is also going to drive immediate value. So that's what the best folks are doing. The ones that just feel like, I believe, where there's this concept of a drip campaign, where you're just dripping out emails and I'm hoping for a 0.01 conversion. You might get that. But even the one that engages, is it really the right one? And so there's so many great tools that allow you to now be very intentional about what's happening to an organization and even happen to specific people. Leverage that to map back to what your product does best. And where we do that systematically and from a process and from a personnel perspective, we strike gold.
Yeah. I like that. You're absolutely right. For the sales reps who say, "Hey, I just sent out 50 emails." Okay, well, there's so much more that needs to be done for a sale to happen. I'm just kind of curious. You touched on AI, and here it is, 22 minutes into the interview, and we haven't really gotten deep into it for both of you. I'm just kind of curious. Where does AI actually help your sales team or sales teams in general today? And maybe where is it being oversold? But how do you want to see your sales reps using AI? And Eric, why don't you start, and then Eric, Dean, why don't you chime in?
Sure. Well, this is a top-down thing for us. This starts with our CEO and on down. If we are not leveraging AI, we are behind, period. And he pushes us hard. I push the team hard. because there are just too many efficiencies to be gained to not do it. And so where we can, as I was mentioning, where we can leverage it to help with our intent, where we can leverage what's happening in an organization via, and there's so many wonderful off the tool shelves that are leveraging AI. There's just, the large language models that we can go use from a consumer perspective that help us map pain, current events to Island. We're also always thinking about ways that we can do it in our browser. So I'll give you an example. In the Island browser, if I'm in Salesforce, I am scrolling over a record. Uh, from an AI perspective, I can inject some knowledge to say you should reach out to this person based on what just happened to this account, just by scrolling over that record when I'm in Salesforce. And so that's something that the rep may not have known, but we're now injecting to help that person be very, very successful. And then, oh, by the way, when you click yes, let's have AI generate that email based on what we think is important to that person in that account from you. Now, as a rep, I have an opportunity to personalize that. I might know that, hey, it's this guy's birthday in 2 weeks, so I want to personalize it. But it's those types of things where it's recommending what you should be doing based on information that it has, just like that. Those things work really, really well. Now, as a sales leader, I will tell you, relying on AI to do your forecast, to be able to represent to the board, all that kind of stuff, excuse my French, bullshit. There is no replacement for digging into what's really happening in the business, understanding not just what AI says your pipeline conversion is going to be, but why is your pipeline conversion going to be like that? How do you understand from historicals why it's going to do that? So relying on AI to manage your sales organization is false hope. Leveraging AI to help you be much, much more efficient, intentional, and intelligent. Absolutely, we're all in on.
Yeah, Dean, as I follow up with you on Eric's great answer there, historically, there's an expression that all politics is local and all IT is local. So, the people who are most successful selling into SLED markets lived across the street from the state capitol. Not lived across the street,
Yes,
but
yes.
they lived in town. They knew the universities. The kids played, softball together, and obviously that's changed a lot because of the nature of how organizations are set up. But give us some of your insights on using AI, but also the
Sure.
personal side.
Yeah. I think AI for top of funnel, especially for SLED. If you look at generally where we try to capture tunnel funnel, it's top of funnel in SLED, it's at events, which is not like my commercial and private sector enterprise leaders. It's not a great return. In fact, I think it's like 5% conversion on event leads is good or good. We use there's several great data enrichment tools that are now combining an AI component into it that can do FOIA requests to really reduce the size of the haystack on the top of funnel side that I'm really excited about. And furthermore, like a lot of the data that we get from kind of Zoom and LinkedIn is not always as fresh as, what a public sector or SLED tool specifically is. And now kind of getting back to what you said, I wouldn't want a highly paid sales rep doing, emails with 1% conversion rates. But now if you can actually customize an email and automate an email that's going to that persona based upon something you heard in a committee meeting or at a public event or at a state where a CISO said something and actually customize that with no touch, and that takes my acceleration top of funnel from, largely what you said before. You got to be at a table on an event and hope somebody comes by and swipe their badge, right? I think the biggest game changer for us in SLED is how do we use AI at top of funnel to automate a lot of the things that you just talked about? Because as I said, how am I going to cover 300,000 accounts with, 10, 15, 20 AEs? It's impossible. They got to pick their poison. But now with AI, I think we can do a lot more customized emails directly to those personas. That's where I'm most excited about it at Island, and especially I think for us in our space. I'm not going to name the vendors we're using because I don't want to tip off any of my competitors, but the tools are out there.
Absolutely. All right. Wow. This has been great. A lot of great ground that we covered here. We'll end the show where I'll ask you both for an action step. You've both given us a lot of great ideas, something specific that sales professionals must do right now to be successful. But I want to thank you both, Eric and Dean. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you desperately want to get out there before you give us your final action step, Eric? Are we good?
I'm good. Yeah, happy to give an action step. But yeah, I'm great.
All right. So, yeah. So, once again, I want to thank you both. Once again, you can find today's complete transcript, salesgamechangerspodcast.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. All right, Eric, give us a final action step. You both have given us a lot of great ideas, something specific sales professionals must do right now to take their sales career to the next level.
Yeah, for me, it's easy. My favorite saying is a very simple saying, and it's just that life rewards action.
Mm.
The advice that I give to somebody that's on day one or day 761 is to always be moving forward, be moving sideways, just be moving. And when you think about attacking accounts or learning about your customers or educating them on what we can do or discovering what's important to them, that only happens when you're active. I love, the thought of never eat alone. Never. If I tell people all the time, hey, if you have an open lunch, or go take a channel partner, go take a peer, go do something, go learn. Just be active. Be active high, be active low, be active wide. Good things come to those that are active.
Yeah. That's a great. I actually have a little quote here on my wall. It's movement, not motion. So,
Yes.
like setting it. Oh yeah, I just sent 500 emails. Well, nothing happened. Like we talked about the 0.01%. But if I'm moving the deal forward by talking to a channel partner, talking to a customer, talking with a peer, whatever it might be, and who's someone who understands where I'm trying to go with the business, that's where movement is going to happen. Great answer, Dean. Why don't you bring us home here?
Sure. I'll riff off a little bit about the last conversation we just had. I think usually, AEs and good salespeople fall on a spectrum of being really process oriented or just all grit, right? And I do think like a lot of the process and a lot of things we do for inspection, typically manually done, consumed a lot of time. I do think with AI, it gives you great promise to put into a territory plan, a dynamic territory plan with real feeds into it that can give you a dashboard on how to operate. I'm big on the process. I love Coach Signetti from Indiana University talking about process, but I think you got to complement that with a lot of the things Eric talked about, those intangible qualities and those things that are not just activity but are producing results. And I think being able to manage that, to enable to have that input. So I think there's this great opportunity for people who used to be let's just say process adverse to really implement a good process, a repeatable, predictable process in real time through modern tools. So they should be able to do that easier. And you combine that with all those intangible qualities of curiosity and grit. I think that's the recipe for success.
Wow, that's great. Once again, I want to thank Eric Appel and Dean Scontras from
You bet.
Island for being on today's Sales Game Changers podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.